Hi everyone, this is Hardik sir, and I'll be doing a part of human respiratory system, which can be utilized by grade 9 ICSE students, grade 10 CBSE students, and even those who are aspiring to prepare for NEET can probably use these basics. So starting with respiratory system. Now, respiratory system is one of those organ systems present in the human body that consists of the nose, the air passages, the lungs, the parts within the lungs like the alveoli, bronchi, bronchioles, etc. It also involves the distribution of oxygen throughout the body, the utilization of this oxygen by your body cells, and also the processes that help in carrying the carbon dioxide from the body tissues back to the lungs for its removal. So we will first see the overview of the excretory system. Now, as far as the human respiratory system, I'm sorry. So as far as the human respiratory system is concerned, the upper respiratory part will consist of the nose, the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx. Okay, so these are the regions of the upper respiratory tract. And then you have the lower respiratory tract that will consist of the trachea, the bronchi. Bronchi will include primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi. Then you will have the bronchioles, the terminal bronchioles having the alveoli at their branches. So all these together form the lower respiratory system. Now, let us start with the upper respiratory structures first to begin with. Now, then the nose opens by means of a pair of external nerves that lead us to the nasal cavity. I repeat, the nose opens by a pair of external nerves that lead us to the nasal cavity. Now, this nasal cavity is lined by three important structures. I repeat, the nasal cavity is lined by three important structures. One is the blood capillaries. Second is the mucus glands. And the third is hair. Now, the purpose of blood capillaries is to help in exchange of heat. The outside air that we inhale is at a varying temperature. So in order to adjust it to our body temperature, the blood capillaries are present inside the nasal cavity, which help in exchange of heat and adjusting the temperature of the air taken in to your normal body temperature. So that is the purpose of the blood capillaries. The blood capillaries also kind of maintain some moisture within the nasal cavity. The second are the mucus glands. Now, these mucus secreting glands or cells release a slimy or a sticky substance that is called mucus. Now, this mucus helps to trap the bacteria and other germs that are trying to enter into your body along with the inhaled air. And the third is the hair. Now, these hair are meant to intercept larger molecules like dust particles, which may enter in along with the air that is inhaled. So the nasal cavity is lined by these three structures, and that is why it is important that we always breathe through our nose and not through our mouth, because the mouth does not have mucus glands or it does not have the hair cells to trap the germs or dust particles that are taken in along with the inhaled air. So for proper filtration of the inhaled air and also to adjust or regulate its temperature to our body temperature, we must always inhale or take in air through the nose. Now, just like we have the external nerves, there'll be internal nerves also after the nasal cavity. Of course, higher up in the nasal cavity is also located the olfactory epithelium. Now, this olfactory epithelium will have sensory cells that help in olfaction or sense of smell. From the nasal cavity, the internal nerves will open into a region that is called as the pharynx. Now, pharynx is a common passage for air as well as food. I repeat, the pharynx is a common passage for air as well as food. Now, the pharynx is divided into three regions, which I'll mark them here. This is the nasopharynx. which will only have air. Then you have the oropharynx, also called as the buccopharynx, where the oral cavity opens into the pharynx. And then you have the laryngopharynx that lies at the junction of the larynx and the pharynx. So pharynx is basically a common passage for air as well as food. Now the laryngopharynx has two bifurcations, one leading towards the larynx, the other leading towards the esophagus. So here if I'll mark, this will lead towards the esophagus, the posterior part. It leads to the esophagus, okay? And the anterior part will lead towards the larynx. The larynx is also called as the voice box, okay? Now, at the junction of the larynx and the pharynx, the opening is called as glottis. The opening of the larynx is called glottis, and it is guarded or covered by a flap-like structure called the epiglottis. So epiglottis is a cartilage, it's an elastic cartilage that prevents the entry of food or water or any other liquids into the larynx, which may lead to the trachea. So to prevent food particles from reaching your windpipe or the trachea, the epiglottis will shut down while you're swallowing food. Now, let us have a look at the mechanism of swallowing of food. Yeah. So here it is.
Inhaled air and ingested nutrients both pass through the oropharynx behind the oral cavity. A cartilaginous structure called the epiglottis directs food.
So you can see the epiglottis there,
and into the esophagus.
And this epiglottis
inhalation of this material
prevents any food or water from entering into your windpipe.
The superior portion of the epiglottis moves freely and can swing up or down like a trapdoor. With each swallow, the larynx rises and the epiglottis folds down over the laryngeal opening, closing off the airway. If particles make their way into the trachea, the cough reflex pushes air forcefully up through the larynx, forcing the particles back up and out.
Okay. So that is about how the epiglottis prevents the entry of food particles as such. Now, the next part is the larynx. You can see here, this is the epiglottis. Okay. And these are the vocal ligaments. These vocal ligaments are attached to the vocal cords. Now, since the vocal cords vibrate as air passes through them, that is when they help in producing sound. So as the air is being exhaled, okay, these vocal cords will vibrate, and that is what causes them to produce sound. So since the sound is produced from the larynx, we call the larynx also as the voice box. In adolescent boys, the larynx enlarges during adolescence, and it is called as the Adam's apple. Okay. So during the age of adolescence, the larynx will enlarge and it will be visible in the neck in the form of a outgrowth, okay, or an extension. So that is called as the Adam's apple. Now, let us see how the vocal cords vibrate, how sound production happens.
Phonation is the production of sound by structures in the upper respiratory tract. During exhalation, air passes from the lungs through the larynx.
You can see as the air passes from the lungs outside, okay, the ligaments and the vocal cords move. So the vibration of these vocal cords is what produces sound.
Greater tension in the vocal folds creates more rapid vibrations and higher-pitched sounds. Lower tension causes slower vibration and a lower pitch. Sounds can also be altered by other factors. High pressure creates louder sound. Shorter folds produce lower pitch sounds, and longer folds produce higher pitch. Structures in the oral and nasal cavities can also modify the sounds produced by the vocal folds.
Okay. Now, moving on. Now let us move on to the trachea, the windpipe. So as far as the larynx is concerned, it leads us to the windpipe, also called as the trachea. So trachea is a long muscular tube that leads the air from the larynx towards the lungs. As far as the trachea is concerned, the trachea is lined by C-shaped cartilage rings. So if you can see here, there are C-shaped cartilage rings that support the trachea from the front, but there is no support provided from the posterior side or from the back side. The reason is behind the trachea lies the esophagus, which normally remains collapsed when the person is not eating food or not swallowing food. So whenever the esophagus is collapsed, posterior to the esophagus as well lies the vertebral column. And this vertebral column is a very rigid and a bony structure which provides the required support for the trachea to remain distended. So from the front, it requires support which is provided by the C-shaped cartilage rings, and posteriorly the vertebral column will provide support to the trachea. Now, internally, the trachea is lined by ciliated columnar epithelium. The reason that there is a ciliated epithelium is because there is a possibility or chance that the dust particles or food particles or water may enter into the trachea. So to prevent the entry of any unwanted particles into your lungs, these cilia will trap those particles and vibrate and throw them out back towards the pharynx. Also within the trachea are abundant mucus glands or mucus secreting cells for the same purpose, that is to trap any particles that are entering into your lungs via the trachea. The trachea then leads to the lungs, where at the level of the fifth thoracic vertebra, the trachea splits or divides into the bronchi. Now you have primary bronchi. Branches of the primary bronchi are called secondary bronchi. Branches of secondary bronchi further are called tertiary bronchi. And then the bronchi finally end up into smaller branches, finer branches called bronchioles. Now, each bronchiole also further keeps on branching as it goes away, ultimately resulting in the formation of terminal bronchioles. Each terminal bronchiole inside the lung will have a group of alveoli attached to it. Now, alveoli are sac-like, or they are somewhat like grapes structures with a very thin wall, and they help in exchange of gases. So the exchange of gases inside the lungs occurs at the level of alveoli. Now, so let us have a look at that structure further. Yeah, before we move on to that, looking at the cartilage rings. So all these are the C-shaped cartilage rings. So if I isolate them, you can see they are only supporting the trachea from the front side. They are not a complete ring. The reason is from the posterior side to support the trachea, the vertebral column is sufficient. Also, you can see the esophagus lying behind the trachea. Now, so let us look at the function of the trachea and the bronchi before we move further.
The trachea conveys air between upper and lower respiratory structures. This flexible tube extends from the larynx.
So trachea is the passage for air
into the bronchi. Between 15 and 20 cartilaginous C-shaped rings keep the trachea from collapsing or overexpanding. The shape of these cartilaginous rings allows the trachea to change shape to accommodate masses of food passing through the esophagus. Smooth muscle of the trachea can contract to decrease its diameter, which allows air to be expelled out of the lungs more forcefully during coughing. The trachea divides into the bronchi and bronchioles in the lungs. Relaxation of smooth muscle in the bronchioles during exercise causes them to dilate. This bronchodilation allows greater ventilation. Allergic reactions and histamines cause the opposite effect, known as bronchoconstriction.
Now, coming to the lungs, so you can see the lungs are well protected by the thoracic cage from front. Even the vertebral column behind will serve to protect the lungs partly. Now, the left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung. As you can see that it has only two lobes. Okay, the first lobe is called as the superior lobe. The second one is called as the inferior lobe. And you can see clearly that it shows a cardiac notch. If I have to highlight the cardiac notch, I'll just draw a green line here to indicate the cardiac notch. So the heart lies in between the two lungs and it projects towards the left lung by about 3 inches. Now, so the heart, you can see the position of the heart. That's exactly in between the two lungs. Now, that's the right lung, slightly larger, divided into 3 lobes. The superior lobe, then you have the median lobe, the middle lobe, and then you have the inferior lobe. Now, the diaphragm is a muscular sheath that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. As you can see, the liver lying just below the diaphragm on the right side of the abdominal cavity. That's the liver here, lying just below the diaphragm on the right side of the abdominal cavity. Now, this diaphragm helps in ventilation. I repeat, the diaphragm helps in ventilation. Of course, there is one more muscle called intercostal muscles, which also aid or contribute to ventilation. So let us understand the branching of the trachea. So you have the trachea that branches into the primary bronchi. These primary bronchi are also surrounded by the C-shaped cartilage ring. Then you have the secondary bronchi, and then you have the tertiary bronchi. Now the tertiary bronchi finally lead to the bronchioles. The tertiary bronchi and the bronchioles are not supported by C-shaped cartilage rings. Okay. The bronchioles will also further go on branching and ultimately form the terminal bronchioles. These terminal bronchioles will have a bunch of alveoli present at their tips or at their terminals. Now, let us understand or look at the alveoli, how they are present. So as you can see in this structure, there is a bunch of alveoli that is present at the tip of a terminal bronchiole. Now, the alveoli are very thin-walled, sac-like structures, which get filled with air that we inhale. Now, due to extreme thinness of the walls of the alveoli, it is easier for the gases to move across rapidly to and from the blood vessels surrounding the alveoli. Now, you can see the blood capillaries surrounding the alveoli. These capillaries are formed by the division of the pulmonary artery. A pulmonary artery is the artery that brings deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs for oxygenation. I repeat, pulmonary artery is the artery that brings the deoxygenated blood to the heart, to the lungs from the heart for oxygenation. Now, once the pulmonary artery reaches closer to the alveoli, it will break up into arterioles, and arterioles further break up into a capillary network that surrounds the bunch of alveoli. Now, these capillaries will unite and reunite, forming the pulmonary venule, which then again forms a larger vein called as the pulmonary vein. There will be 2 pairs of pulmonary veins bringing the oxygenated blood into the left auricle or the left atrium of the heart. One pair of pulmonary veins from the right lung, the other pair of pulmonary veins from the left lung. So both the pairs of pulmonary veins that carry oxygenated blood from the lungs open into the left atrium of the heart. Now, at the alveoli, oxygen from the alveoli diffuses into the blood capillaries, while carbon dioxide from the blood capillaries diffuses into the alveoli. So, exchange of gases inside the lungs takes place at the surface of alveoli. Now, just to give a brief understanding, excessive smoking or inhalation of tobacco smoke causes permanent irreversible damage to the walls of the alveoli, leading to a condition like emphysema. So in emphysema, what happens is the walls of the alveoli get damaged, and as a result, diffusion of gases is impaired. Moving on. You can see the respiratory membrane. Now, the respiratory membrane is formed of the thin walls of the alveoli. In between the thin walls of the alveoli and the blood capillaries lies the alveolar fluid with a surfactant. That surfactant present in between helps to reduce the surface tension that facilitates rapid diffusion of gases. Now let us understand blood supply to the lungs. So I'll just label these parts here. So that is the right pulmonary artery. I'll just write it as RPA, the right pulmonary artery. And this is the left pulmonary artery, LPA. So these pulmonary arteries arise from the right ventricle of the heart, RV, right ventricle, and carry the deoxygenated blood to the lungs for oxygenation. Now, once oxygenation is completed, there will be two pairs of pulmonary veins. I repeat, there will be two pairs of pulmonary veins, one pair coming from each lung, that open into the left atrium of the heart, So here is one of the left pulmonary veins. And here is the second one actually. It's a branch that you can see a little unclear, but yes, it's definitely there. But I'll just switch on to another model, which will help us to clearly see the pulmonary veins and the pulmonary arteries. I'll hide the skeletal system as well, so we can clearly see the pulmonary arteries and the veins. Okay. So sorry. I'll just select the pulmonary arteries first. So what you see highlighted in purple is basically the right pulmonary artery, and this side is the left pulmonary artery. Then below here you can see one of the left pulmonary veins, and here is the second left pulmonary vein. This way also you can see the superior right pulmonary vein and the left superior pulmonary vein. So there are two pairs of pulmonary veins. From each lung you will have a superior and an inferior pulmonary vein. that opens into the left atrium. I repeat, it opens into the left atrium. So if we look at its tributaries or its branches, so we can just fade the others and we can you can see here the tributaries, and then they will go on to open into the left atrium of the heart. Okay. Now, so here also there'll be, this is one of the right pulmonary veins. And this is another one actually, the inferior and the superior. Okay. So this is about the blood supply to the lungs. Now let us move on in detail to the alveoli. Now the alveoli are lined by squamous epithelium. Now, because they are lined by squamous epithelium, they allow faster diffusion or exchange of gases to take place. Sorry. Yeah. The number of alveoli in the two lungs together is approximately 700 million alveoli in two lungs together. Now, such a large number of alveoli enables the lungs to help in easy exchange of gases. Now, remember that out of the total air composition, only 21% of the air is oxygen. And it is a difference in the pressure of oxygen in the inhaled air and your deoxygenated blood that will cause the diffusion of oxygen to take place from the alveoli into the pulmonary capillaries. The pulmonary capillaries then carry that oxygenated blood back to the lungs. Okay. So this pathway of circulation between the right ventricle back to the left atrium via the lungs is called as pulmonary circulation. You all have previously studied about double circulation. So double circulation is basically where the blood passes through the heart two times. And there are two circuits. One is the pulmonary pathway and the other is the systemic pathway. Now let us have a look at this video, which shows us the steps of external respiration.
Oxygen from the air is exchanged for waste carbon dioxide from the bloodstream. This process of external respiration takes place.
So you can see there that exchange of gases is taking place at the surface of the alveoli. Oxygen from the alveoli diffuses into the blood capillaries, and carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses into the alveoli.
Carbon dioxide from oxygen-depleted blood diffuses from the capillaries into the alveoli and is expelled through exhalation.
Now, most of the oxygen is carried by hemoglobin in the form of an unsteady or an unstable complex called oxyhemoglobin. Now, this oxyhemoglobin is unstable, so that allows the hemoglobin to dissociate away from oxygen when the oxygenated blood reaches the tissues. So once it reaches the tissues, the oxygen will dissociate from hemoglobin and it will be delivered to the needy tissues. And carbon dioxide from the tissues will be received by the blood, which is transported either in the dissolved form in plasma, or in the form of bicarbonate, or even in the form of an unstable complex with hemoglobin called carb-amino-hemoglobin. So hemoglobin forms an unstable complex with both oxygen and carbon dioxide so that it can give them up. It has to give up the oxygen to the tissues and give up the carbon dioxide at the lungs. Had these complexes been stable, then the dissociation of hemoglobin from both these gases wouldn't have been possible. So the availability of free oxygen to carry out the next cycle of circulation of oxygen or carbon dioxide would go on decreasing. Availability of free hemoglobin will go on decreasing for the next cycle of transport of gases. And that is why the complex or the association of hemoglobin with oxygen or with carbon dioxide has to be an unsteady complex. Now, moving on. Now let us see internal respiration, how the oxygen gets delivered to the tissues, and also how carbon dioxide from the tissues is received by the blood.
The bloodstream delivers oxygen to cells and removes waste carbon dioxide through a process called internal respiration. In the lungs, oxygen is absorbed into the erythrocytes in the bloodstream. These cells,
So the RBCs containing hemoglobin will carry the oxygen in the form of oxyhemoglobin.
Gas transporting molecules called hemoglobin. Oxygen
Each molecule of hemoglobin can bind to about 4 molecules of oxygen.
Binds to these molecules. The oxygenated blood then moves through the vasculature. At the narrow capillaries within body tissues, red blood cells release oxygen.
So you can see here the RBCs are releasing oxygen molecules as it reaches the tissue cells,
which then diffuses through the capillary wall into tissues. Meanwhile,
and carbon dioxide from these tissues enter into the blood. Now, this carbon dioxide is transported back to the lungs in either of the 3 forms. It could be in the dissolved form in plasma, or it could be in the form of bicarbonate, sodium or potassium bicarbonate, or it can also be in the form of carbamino hemoglobin.
It is carried inside red blood cells and in plasma. The deoxygenated blood travels through the vasculature and back to the lungs, where carbon dioxide is expelled from the body.
Yeah. That is about internal respiration. Then you have the tissue respiration. Tissue respiration में क्या होता है? That the cells utilize the oxygen that is released by the blood in order to metabolize glucose or break down glucose. That breakdown of glucose in presence of oxygen is called as cellular respiration, and that results in conversion of glucose to carbon dioxide and water. And as glucose molecules are broken down, okay, the carbon-carbon bonds break, and the energy from those carbon-carbon bonds is released to be converted either into ATPs or given out as heat, or it is given out as heat. Now, about 38 molecules of ATPs are produced on breakdown of 1 molecule of glucose. So aerobic respiration, which occurs in presence of oxygen, results in the formation of 38 molecules of ATPs from each molecule of glucose, whereas anaerobic respiration in animals can result only in formation of 2 ATPs. Anaerobic respiration forms only 2 ATPs, whereas aerobic respiration produces 19 times more ATPs, that is 38 ATP molecules per molecule from 1 molecule of glucose. Now, the products of anaerobic respiration in plants and animals are different. In animals, the end product of anaerobic respiration, also called as anoxybiotic respiration, are ATP, 2 ATP molecules, and lactic acid. Lactic acid is formed in animals during anaerobic respiration, which may accumulate in our muscles and causes them to get fatigued. That's why whenever we are doing or engaged in some kind of a strenuous physical exercise, often our muscles start to cramp. We experience muscle cramps. So these muscle cramps are basically due to accumulation of lactic acid. As we rest, the oxygen debt is cleared and the lactic acid accumulated in the muscles is gradually cleared off, and that helps your muscles to regain their strength and you can resume the activity. So the cause of muscle cramps is the accumulation of lactic acid inside the muscles. Okay. So whenever there is insufficient supply of oxygen or the demand for oxygen is high and it is not being met, the muscles may continue to metabolize glucose in absence or in scarcity of oxygen that may result in the formation of lactic acid. Okay. Now, okay. Now moving on to this part of how muscles or how breathing movement takes place. Now, during breathing, breathing is exchange of gases. So remember one thing, that breathing is a part of respiration, but not the other way around. Because respiration is an entire process. We take in air, that is breathe in, Then there is exchange of gases that takes place at the alveoli. Then there is transport of oxygen to the tissues. Once it reaches the tissues, internal respiration takes place. That is exchange of gases between the tissues and the blood capillaries. Once the oxygen is absorbed into the cells, cellular respiration takes place, which results in utilization of oxygen to break down glucose into carbon dioxide and water and releases large amounts of energy. So this entire process is respiration, and breathing is just one part of it. Okay. So the breathing movements are facilitated by the intercostal muscles as well as by the diaphragm. So let us understand how the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm help in ventilation or exchange of gases.
Pulmonary ventilation, or breathing, is induced by changes in the volume of the lungs and the air pressure within them. During normal inhalation,
during inhalation, the external intercostal muscles will contract. The external intercostal muscles contract during inhalation, and they pull the ribs upwards and outwards. So this causes an increase in space inside the thoracic cavity. So in short, I'll say that the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. Further, the diaphragm flattens. It moves down, it becomes flat, and pushes the abdominal wall down and out. So that increases the volume inside the thoracic cavity as well. So the volume of the thoracic cavity is increased by two factors. One is the upward and the outward movement of the ribs, and second is the flattening of the diaphragm. Now, the upward and the outer movement of the ribs is facilitated by the intercostal muscles, and the diaphragm itself, being a muscle, will flatten and push the abdominal wall outwards to help in increasing the space within the thoracic cavity. And you'll have learned in chemistry that at a constant temperature, okay, volume and pressure of a gas are inversely proportional. So if the volume of the thoracic cavity is increasing, the pressure inside the lungs will decrease, and that will cause the outside air to rush in. And this process continues till the air pressure inside your lungs and outside equalize. So let us have a look at this video again.
Intercostal muscles contract and the rib cage elevates. As the volume of the lungs increases, air pressure in the lungs drops below atmospheric pressure and air rushes in. During normal exhalation, the muscles relax, the lungs become smaller, pressure inside.
During exhalation, the diaphragm will again become dome-shaped. The diaphragm relaxes and again becomes dome-shaped. So the abdominal organs and the abdominal wall will move inwards and upwards. The internal intercostal muscles will help in bringing the rib cage downwards and inwards. So the relaxation of the diaphragm and it becomes dome-shaped, and the inward and downward movement of the rib cage brought about by the internal intercostal muscles, I'll show it to you all in a while, causes a decrease in the volume of the thoracic cavity. This decrease inside the volume of the thoracic cavity increases the pressure, and the air from the lungs will rush out.
And air is expelled. Boyle's law explains this relationship between volume.
So exactly what I told you, the Boyle's law. As the volume increases, pressure decreases.
Air inside. A decrease in the volume raises pressure in the reduced space. The body's demand for more oxygen can change normal breathing to forced breathing. Additional muscles increase the changes in volume of the thoracic.
So you can see the intercostal muscles.
More air can pass in and out more rapidly.
So let us again identify these muscles as well. Yeah. So I'm just going to identify the main ones that you have in your syllabus. The diaphragm, okay, that helps to push down the abdominal organs or push them outwards. Then you have the external intercostal muscles that are mainly associated with inhalation. And then you have the internal intercostal muscles, which we'll see here. Yeah, so these are the internal intercostal muscles, which will help in exhalation of air. They will help in pulling the rib cage downwards and inwards. Okay, so this is about breathing movements. Now, on an average, an adult will breathe about 12 to 18 times a minute. However, this the frequency of the cycle may increase whenever a person is doing some kind of a physical strenuous exercise. In newborns, the breathing rate is much faster as compared to in adults. It is because their body actively demands more oxygen, and therefore their breathing rate is much higher than the adults. Now, the next part is regulation of breathing. So there is a pneumotaxic center that is located in the brain, in the medulla oblongata. So the pons varoli and the medulla oblongata, both are parts of hindbrain. I repeat, the pons varoli and the medulla oblongata together send signals for regulating the breathing rate. So let us see here how exactly the brain, the specific parts of the brain include the pons and the medulla, how they help in regulating ventilation or the breathing rate.
Respiration is an involuntary function. Nerve
The
impulses
respiration is
transmitted by
involuntary.
the pons and the medulla oblongata to respiratory muscles regulate the respiratory rate. The rate of normal breathing is 12 to 15 breaths per minute. The body adjusts the rate and depth of normal breathing in response to metabolic needs. When the body uses more oxygen or holds too much carbon dioxide, sensors in the circulatory
So when too much of
system
carbon
called
dioxide is produced,
chemoreceptors send
the
signals to
ventilation
the
will
brain.
increase,
The
and that
rate
will
and
cause
depth of
faster
ventilation or
breathing in order to
breathing
get rid of that
increases
excess
so that
carbon
more
dioxide.
gas can be exchanged. Involuntary breathing mechanisms can be overridden by the cerebral cortex. Actions, including talking, sneezing, and coughing, can also alter breathing patterns for short periods of time.
Okay. So the respiratory center located in the medulla will help in regulation of breathing. Now, coming to respiratory volumes and capacities. Now, as far as respiratory volumes are concerned, it talks about the amount of air that is taken in or given out during some specific conditions. And respiratory capacities are combinations of two or more volumes together. Okay. Now, as far as the first term is concerned, that is tidal volume. It's the amount of air a person can breathe in or out during an effortless or normal breathing. So during an effortless or normal breathing, whatever amount of air a person can breathe in or out is called as tidal volume. Now, as far as tidal volume is concerned, normally it is about 500 ml. Normally it is about 500 ml. So here it is. Out of this 500 ml, about 150 ml remains trapped in the respiratory passages. So that includes the trachea, bronchi, etc., from where direct exchange of gases cannot take place. So this 150 ml out of the 500 ml is not usable for exchange of gases. The remaining 350 ml which reaches the alveoli is called as alveolar air. Okay, so the total volume of air that a person can breathe in or out during a normal effortless breathing is called as tidal volume. Now the next is inspiratory reserve volume. Now inspiratory reserve volume is roughly around 3000 ml. Now this is the amount of air a person can forcibly breathe in over and above the tidal air. So the excess amount of air that a person can forcibly breathe in over and above the tidal air is called as inspiratory reserve volume, also known as complemental air. Now this inspiratory reserve volume is about 3000 ml, 2500 to 3000 is the range hota hai. So the combination of tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume, IRV, is nothing but inspiratory capacity, that is IC, which is about 3000 to 3500 ml. So inspiratory reserve volume is around 2500 to 3000 ml. And that's why the inspiratory capacity is about 3000 to 3500 ml. Okay. Now, The next term is expiratory reserve volume. That's the amount of air a person can forcibly breathe out after a normal expiration. After a normal expiration, the amount of air that a person can forcibly still exhale out is called as expiratory reserve volume, which is about 1000 ml. Okay. So now coming to this term, vital capacity. So vital capacity is nothing but it is the maximum amount of air that can be expired out after a maximum inspiratory effect. So maximum inspiration is IC. Maximum expiration is expiratory reserve volume. So TV plus IRV plus ERV, that is expiratory reserve volume, also called as supplemental air, is nothing but vital capacity, VC. Now, vital capacity is approximately around 4,500 ml. So I'm repeating the definition of vital capacity. It is the maximum amount of air that can be expired after a maximum inspiratory effort. Okay. Now, the next is residual volume. Now, even after forcibly exhaling out, all the air from the lungs is never replaced. The reason that all the air from the lungs can never get replaced or should never be replaced is because if all of the air gets exhaled out, then the alveoli may collapse and they may never be able to open up again. And that's the reason why some amount of air should always be left behind even after a maximum amount of expiration. So this air that is left behind is called as residual volume, which is about 1000 ml. It's 1500 ml as per the ICSE textbooks. So vital capacity is 4,500 and residual volume is 1,500. So VC plus RV, residual volume, is equal to TLC, that is total lung capacity. Now, total lung capacity comes to approximately around 6,000 ml. Okay. So 6,000 ml is the total lung capacity. All right. So this is about the chapter respiration. Most of the points have been covered. I'll just be discussing two disorders and then we'll be winding up the topic. Okay, so now coming to two disorders related to the respiratory system. One is hypoxia and the other is asphyxiation. Now, hypoxia is a condition that a person may suffer when they are sitting in a very closed and poorly ventilated room. Sometimes even when they travel to high altitude places. Because when you go to higher altitude places, the amount of oxygen in the air goes on decreasing. And that may cause hypoxia. Now, the word hypoxia, hypo means low and oxia means oxygen. So whenever the amount of oxygen reaching the tissues is less than normal, that condition is called as hypoxia. Now, as far as hypoxia is concerned, it may even happen when a person is sitting in a poorly ventilated room, as I stated at the start. In hypoxia, okay, if we see a patient around us suffering from hypoxia, we must immediately ensure that they get proper ventilation. Maybe if there are windows that are closed, they should be open. The person should have free or should not be surrounded by too many people. He should be allowed to breathe freely in a relaxed pose. Okay, that will help him recover quickly. Now, asphyxiation is the second condition that is related to the respiratory system. Now, in asphyxiation, the person is unable to exhale out the carbon dioxide from the lungs. So there is accumulation of too much of carbon dioxide, or we can say that the blood becomes venous. We can say that the blood becomes venous. Venous means the type of blood that is there in the veins, which is deoxygenated or poorly oxygenated and has more of carbon dioxide in it. So asphyxiation can be caused due to strangulation when anything is tied around the neck. Okay. Or it could also happen during drowning because the person is unable to exhale out the carbon dioxide. or it can also be due to choking of some substance which obstructs the airway. So if the cause is not immediately removed, it can even result in instant death. Okay. So these are two disorders. We are done with this major part of the chapter. Okay. So thank you for watching this video. Keep liking and keep subscribing. Have a great day.